The First Nations are the various Aboriginal peoples in Canada who are neither Inuit nor Métis. There are currently 634 recognized First Nations governments or bands spread across Canada, roughly half of which are in the provinces of Ontario and British Columbia. The total population is more than 850,000 people. Under the Employment Equity Act, First Nations are a designated group, along with women, visible minorities, and people with physical or mental disabilities. First Nations are not defined as a visible minority under the Act or by the criteria of Statistics Canada. Within Canada, First Nations has come into general use, replacing the deprecated term Indians for the indigenous peoples of the Americas. Individuals using the term outside Canada include supporters of the Cascadian independence movement as well as American tribes within the Pacific Northwest. The singular, commonly used on culturally politicized reserves, is the term First Nations person. A more recent trend is for members of various nations to refer to themselves by their tribal or national identity only, e.g., I'm Haida, or we're Kwantleans, in recognition of the distinctiveness of First Nations ethnicities. North American indigenous peoples have cultures spanning thousands of years. Some of their oral traditions accurately describe historical events, such as the Cascadia earthquake of 1700 and the 18th century Tseax cone eruption. Written records began with the arrival of European explorers and colonists during the Age of Discovery, beginning in the late 15th century. European accounts by trappers, traders, explorers, and missionaries give important evidence of early contact culture. In addition, archaeological and anthropological research, as well as linguistics, have helped scholars piece together understanding of ancient cultures and historic peoples. Although not without conflict or slavery, Euro-Canadians' early interactions with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit populations were less combative compared to the often violent battles between colonists and native peoples in the United States. Combined with later economic development, this relatively non-combative history has allowed First Nations peoples to have an influence on the national culture, while preserving their own identities. Terminology. Collectively, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples constitute Aboriginal peoples in Canada, Indigenous peoples of the Americas or First Peoples. First Nations came into common usage in the 1980s to replace the term Indian band. Elder Sol Sanderson says that he coined the term in the early 1980s. Others state that the term came into common usage in the 1970s to avoid using the word Indian, which some Canadians considered offensive. Apparently, no legal definition of the term exists. Some Aboriginal peoples in Canada have also adopted the term First Nation to replace the word band in the name of their community. A band is a legally recognized body of Indians for whose collective use and benefit lands have been set apart or money is held by the Canadian Crown, or declared to be a band for the purposes of the Indian Act. While the word Indian is still a legal term, its use is erratic and in decline in Canada. Some First Nations people consider the term offensive, while others prefer it to Aboriginal persons, people, even though the term is a misnomer given to Indigenous peoples of North America by European explorers who erroneously thought they had landed on the Indian subcontinent. The use of the term Native Americans, which the United States government and others have adopted, is not common in Canada. It refers more specifically to the Aboriginal peoples residing within the boundaries of the United States. The parallel term, Native Canadian, is not commonly used, but natives and autochthonous are, under the Royal Proclamation of 1763, also known as the Indian Magna Carta. The Crown referred to Indigenous peoples in British territory as tribes or nations. The term First Nations is capitalized, unlike alternative terms. Bands and nations may have slightly different meanings.